That night, my father didn't ask if I was okay. He just whispered to my brother that I wasn't worth a penny. I walked out into the freezing rain, holding nothing but a single bag and the trembling hand of a boy I had found at the community center. 3 days later, the richest man in Fairview Estates was looking at me like a trap. But the real shock wasn't who the boy was. It was who had made him disappear. My name is Skylar Parker, and at 36 years old, I stood on the porch of the house I grew up in, watching my life dissolve into the gray sleet of a Fairview evening. The cold wasn't just in the air. It was seeping out from the hallway behind me, radiating from the 3 people who were supposed to be my safety net. I had just signed the final divorce papers 48 hours ago. I had lost my job as a paralegal exactly 24 hours after that. And now I was losing the last thing I had left to trade my dignity. My father, Gordon Parker, stood in the doorway. He didn't look like a man seeing his daughter in crisis. He looked like the HOA board treasurer analyzing a failed investment that needed to be liquidated. He wore the cashmere sweater I had bought him 3 Christmases ago, the one I still thought affection could be purchased with. Beside him, my mother studied the intricate patterns of the foyer rug, refusing to lift her eyes. She was a ghost in her own home. And then there was Trent, my brother, leaning against the doorframe, sipping a dark liquid from a crystal tumbler, looking for all the world like he had just won the neighborhood golf tournament. I tightened my grip on the handle of my single duffel bag. Contained 2 changes of clothes, a folder of useless legal documents, and a toothbrush. My other hand held on to something far more precious and far heavier in consequence. Milo stood beside me. He was 7 years old, though his ribs showed through his tattered t-shirt as if he were 5. He was trembling, not just from the Ohio chill, but from the distinct vibrating tension that children sense before violence erupts. He was not my son. He was not my blood to my family. He was just debris I had picked up in the wake of my own wreckage. "Dad," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to keep it still. "It's just for a few nights, just until I can cash my final check. I have nowhere else." Gordon Parker looked at me, then down at Milo. His lip curled in a micro-expression of disgust that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his standard mask of indifference. "We are not running a shelter, Skylar," he said. His voice was level, reasonable, the voice of a man explaining why a violation notice had to be issued. "You made your choices. You chose that loser husband. You chose to blow up your career. And now you choose to drag strays into my house." "He is a child," I said, stepping slightly in front of Milo to shield him from the glare. "He has no one." "Neither do you," Trent chimed in. He swirled his drink. "Face it, Sky. You are a toxic asset." "Quiet, Trent," my father said, though without heat. He pointed a manicured finger toward the street. "Take your bag and take the boy. You are not staying here." The door began to close. It was a heavy solid oak door that I used to think was beautiful. Now it looked like the lid of a coffin. "Mom," I whispered. My mother flinched, but she did not look up. The lock clicked into place before the wood even met the frame. I stood there for a heartbeat, paralyzed. The rain was picking up, turning from a drizzle into a freezing downpour that stung my cheeks. I turned away, feeling the physical weight of rejection pressing down on my shoulders. I took 1 step down the brick stairs, then 2. That was when I heard it. My father must have thought the heavy wood was thick enough to muffle his voice. Or perhaps he simply did not care if I heard. He was speaking to Trent. His voice projected with the clarity of a judgment passed in a quiet courtroom. "Your sister isn't worth a penny. She's done." The sentence hit me in the back of the knees. I almost stumbled. "She isn't worth a penny." It was not anger. It was an appraisal to Gordon Parker. People were investments. I was a stock that had bottomed out. I was a zero on a balance sheet. I looked down at Milo. He was staring up at me, his eyes wide and dark, reflecting the porch light that was suddenly extinguished, plunging us into shadow. He had heard it, too. He squeezed my fingers, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "Come on," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollowed out by the wind. "Where are we going?" Milo asked. His voice was small, a whisper that barely survived the wind. "Away," I said. "Just away." We walked. We walked past the manicured lawns of my parents' neighbors, past the heated garages and the windows glowing with the warm yellow light of family dinners and television sets. Every window was a picture of a life I used to have, a life I was now exiled from. The rain soaked through my thin jacket within 10 minutes. My boots, not designed for hiking through puddles, began to squelch with every step. Milo trudged beside me, head down, shivering. He did not complain. That was the thing about Milo that broke my heart more than any tantrum could. He was used to discomfort. He expected it. We reached the bus stop on 4th Street. The metal bench was wet, but the plastic shelter offered a reprieve from the direct assault of the rain. I sat Milo down and sat next to him, pulling him into my side to share body heat. I opened my bag and dug out the last granola bar I had saved from the community center vending machine yesterday. "Here," I said, peeling the wrapper. "Eat half. Save half." He took it with shaking hands. "Are you hungry, Skylar?" "No," I lied. My stomach was a knotted fist of hunger and nausea. I ate a big lunch. I checked my pockets. I had $12.40 in cash. My bank account was overdrawn by $300 thanks to Derek, my ex-husband, who had cleaned it out before disappearing.
$12.
That could buy us what? A hot meal. Maybe, but then we would have nothing for tomorrow. "Is this our house now?" Milo asked, looking at the graffiti-scarred plastic wall of the bus stop. "No," I said firmly. "This is just a stop. We are moving to where? To somewhere better." I did not know where that was. I pulled out my phone. It had 14% battery left. I scrolled through my contacts, but my thumb hovered over names and then moved on. Friends from my old life. They knew Trent. They knew Derek. They would ask questions I could not answer. Or worse, they would offer pity before making an excuse. I could not handle pity tonight. Pity was just contempt wrapped in a hug. I saw a police cruiser roll slowly past the intersection. I stiffened. If they saw us, a woman with a bag and a dirty, shivering child, at 9 o'clock at night, they would stop. Questions would be asked. I grabbed Milo's hand. "We have to move." We walked toward the downtown area where the shadows were deeper and people looked at you less. We passed the First Methodist Church, but the wrought iron gates were chained shut. I remembered hearing they only opened the shelter when the temperature dropped below 20. Tonight it was 35, close enough to freeze, not cold enough for mercy. We found ourselves near the community center where a food pantry operated during the day. It was closed, dark, and silent. I saw a figure standing near the entrance, smoking a cigarette under the overhang. I tried to steer Milo around, but the woman turned. It was a woman I recognized vaguely from my time volunteering years ago. She wore a lanyard, a social worker. She squinted at us through the rain. Her eyes dropped to Milo, taking in his wet hair, his oversized shoes, the way he leaned into me. Then she looked at me. "Ma'am," she called out. Her voice was professional, sharp. "You can't be out here with him." I kept walking, head down. "We are fine. Just heading home." She took a step forward, tossing her cigarette. "Hey, stop. Do you have a place to stay tonight? Because if you don't, I am mandated to report a child at risk. You know how the system works." I froze. The system. I knew exactly how the system worked. I was a paralegal. I knew that without a fixed address, without proof of income, Milo would be taken. They would put him in a foster home or a group facility. They would separate us. He would be safe and he would be alone again. The terror that spiked in my chest was colder than the rain. "We have a place," I said, my voice rising in panic. "We are just waiting for our ride. My brother is coming." The lie tasted like ash. The woman hesitated, looking at her phone as if debating whether to dial. "Go," I whispered to Milo. "Walk fast." We hurried around the corner, ducking into an alleyway behind a row of closed shops. I pulled Milo behind a dumpster, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. We waited there for 5 minutes, listening for footsteps, for sirens. Nothing came but the sound of rain on metal. "Did I do something bad?" Milo whispered. I dropped to my knees on the wet pavement and grabbed his shoulders. "No, no, Milo. You are good. You are so good. They just want to take you where I can't go. And I promised you." "You promised," he echoed. "I won't let them take you," I said. It was a vow made to the darkness, to the wet bricks, to the universe that had decided I wasn't worth a penny. "I don't care what I have to do. I won't let go." We found a dry spot eventually. It was the recessed loading dock of a furniture store. There was an overhang that blocked the wind and some discarded cardboard that was dry enough to sit on. It was humiliating. It was rock bottom. I sat with my back against the concrete wall, pulling Milo into my lap. I wrapped my coat around both of us, buttoning it over him so only his head poked out. He was shivering violently now. "I'm sorry," I whispered into his hair. "I'm so sorry, Milo." He was quiet for a long time. I thought he had fallen asleep, exhausted by the trauma of the day. My own eyes were heavy, burning with unshed tears. I could hear my father's voice on a loop. "She's done. She's done." Maybe he was right. I had no money. I had no home. I was hiding behind a dumpster with a child I had no legal right to keep. Then Milo stirred. He pulled his hand out of the coat and touched my cheek. His fingers were ice cold. "Skylar," he whispered. "I'm here, buddy. I'm here." He turned his head, looking out at the rain falling in sheets against the streetlights. His eyes were distant, unfocused, as if looking through the alleyway and into another time. "I remember something," he said. I brushed the wet hair from his forehead. "What do you remember? Did you remember your last name?" He shook his head slowly. "No, not that." He paused and his breathing hitched. He leaned closer to my ear as if sharing a secret that was dangerous to speak aloud. "I remember a name," he said. "Not mine. His." "Whose?" I asked gently. Milo swallowed hard. "The man in the tall glass house. The one who made me hide." I went still. "What was the name?" Milo looked up at me and for the first time I saw something other than fear in his eyes. I saw a memory sharp enough to cut. "Vance," he whispered. He said his name was Vance. The name hung in the cold air between us, heavy and electric. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain slide down my spine. Vance. I knew that name. Everyone in Fairview Estates knew that name. Damian Vance, the billionaire developer who had built this entire gated community and still lived in the glass-walled mansion at the top of the hill. Milo closed his eyes, burying his face in my chest, seeking warmth. But I remained wide awake, staring into the dark, realizing that the bottom of the barrel was not where I had landed. It was merely the starting line of something far more terrifying. The rain and the humiliation of my father's porch felt like a lifetime away, though in reality the seed of my destruction and my salvation had been planted only 3 days earlier. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of gray, stagnant Tuesday that makes you feel as though the world has stopped spinning just to watch you bleed. I was sitting in the plastic chair of the waiting room at the Fairview Community Center. The only place in town where the coffee was under $2 and nobody asked why you had been sitting there for 3 hours staring at a wall. I was hiding. I was hiding from the empty apartment I could no longer afford, hiding from the job rejection emails piling up in my inbox, and hiding from the crushing reality that at 36 I was starting over with nothing. That was when I saw him. He was sitting 3 rows away, tucked into the corner near a dying potted fern. He was small, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, wearing a faded navy t-shirt that was 2 sizes too big and stained with what looked like motor oil. His jeans were frayed at the hems, dragging over a pair of sneakers that did not match. He was not crying. Children in community centers usually cry, scream, or play games on their parents' phones. This boy was doing none of those things. He sat with the stillness of a statue, his hands gripping the edge of the plastic seat so tightly his knuckles were white. He was watching the automatic doors slide open and closed, flinching every time a security guard walked past. People walked by him, volunteers, staff, residents. They walked right past him as if he were part of the furniture. He was invisible. I watched him for 20 minutes. No parent came to claim him. No name was called that made him stand up. He was just a ghost haunting the waiting room. A heavy-set volunteer with a clipboard finally stopped near my row. She looked exhausted, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced indifference of someone who had seen too much. Her gaze landed on the boy, then drifted to me. "Ma'am," she called out. I looked up, blinking. She gestured toward the boy with her pen. "Is he with you? We don't allow unaccompanied minors in the waiting area unless they are being triaged. Security will have to call Child Protective Services if he is alone." The boy's head snapped toward me. The terror in his eyes was absolute. It was not the fear of a child afraid of a volunteer. It was the primal fear of a trapped animal realizing the cage door is about to close. He scrambled off the chair and took 2 hesitant steps toward me. He did not speak, but his hand reached out, trembling in the air between us. He grabbed 2 of my fingers. His skin was rough, chapped from the cold, and feverishly warm. "Please," he whispered. The sound was barely audible over the intercom. "Don't let them take me." I looked at the volunteer. I looked at the divorce papers in my lap, the physical proof that I had failed at building a family. I looked at this boy who was vibrating with fear, holding on to me as if I were the only solid object in a dissolving world. I did not think. If I had thought, I would have walked away. Instead, I folded the divorce papers and shoved them into my bag. I stood up and squeezed the boy's hand. "Yes," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. "He is with me. I am sorry." He wandered off to get water. The volunteer let out a sigh of relief. "Keep him close, then. It is busy today." She walked away. The air around us seemed to shift. The boy did not let go of my hand. He held on tighter, pressing his side against my leg. I looked down at him, and for the first time in months, the hollow ache in my chest was replaced by a surge of adrenaline. "What is your name?" I asked quietly, leading him toward the exit before anyone could ask follow-up questions. "M.O.," he said. He looked up at me, his eyes large and dark, scanning my face for signs of danger. "I am Milo." "Okay, Milo," I said. "Let's get out of here." We walked out into the cool air of the parking lot. I did not have a car anymore. Derek had taken it. So we walked to the bus stop. During the ride to my cramped studio apartment, I tried to get information from him. Anything that could help me find where he belonged. "Where are your parents?" "Milo?" I asked. "Did you get lost?" He stared out the window at the passing city. "I don't have parents like other kids." "Everyone has parents," I said gently. "Do you remember a house? A street name?" He frowned, concentrating hard. "It was big," he murmured. "Really big. The floor was shiny like ice, and there were books. A whole room of books with glass walls. Glass walls? That sounded distinctive. Who was there with you? Men, he said. He shivered, pulling his knees up to his chest on the bus seat. Men in black cars. They called the big man sir. Just sir. He never smiled. Did sir hurt you? Milo shook his head slowly, but his eyes grew distant. No, he just put me in a room. He said I had to wait, but I waited for a long time. Then the other man came, the one who smelled like smoke, and he put me in the van. He said I was going on a trip. And then what happened? I ran, he said simply. When the van stopped at the red light, I opened the door and I ran. I felt a chill settle over me. This was not a simple case of a child wandering off from the playground. This sounded like something far more complicated and far more dangerous. When we got to my apartment, a fourth floor walk-up with peeling paint and a radiator that clanked all night, I did exactly what my training as a paralegal dictated. I opened my laptop and went to work. I searched the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I scoured the local police bulletins for the last 48 hours. I searched for keywords boy missing, 7 years old, kidnapping. I found nothing. There were no alerts matching his description, no frantic parents pleading on the evening news. It was as if Milo had dropped out of the sky. Is my picture there? Milo asked. He was standing behind me holding a mug of warm milk I had made for him. No, I said, closing the laptop. Not yet. I knew I should call the police. That was the lawful thing to do. But looking at the bruises on his arms, watching the way he flinched at sudden noises, and hearing his story about Sir in the van, my instincts screamed that the police might just hand him back to the people he had run from, or worse, they would throw him into a foster system that I knew from professional experience was overburdened and often cruel. Can I stay? He asked. I looked at my bank account balance on the screen. $300. I had rent due in 2 weeks. I had no job. I had just lied to a volunteer and effectively taken a child. You can stay, I said. For now. The next 2 days were a blur of survival. We created a strange, fragile little world in that apartment. I went out during the day to work odd jobs, cleaning houses, walking dogs, anything that paid cash under the table while Milo sat in the corner of the room where I worked, reading books I had picked up from the dollar bin at the thrift store. We ate cheap meals, macaroni and cheese, peanut butter sandwiches, canned soup, but we made it a ritual. We sat on the floor of my apartment because I had sold the table and we pretended we were having a picnic. I learned that Milo was terrified of the dark. So I bought a $2 nightlight shaped like a star. I learned that he had never eaten a s'more. So we toasted marshmallows over the gas burner of my stove, laughing when they caught fire. He was quiet, incredibly well-behaved, as if he believed that making a sound would cause him to vanish. He folded his blanket with military precision every morning. He never asked for anything. On the third night, the night before I would receive the eviction notice that would send us to my father's house, we were lying on the mattress I had pulled onto the floor. I had given him the only pillow. Milo, I whispered into the dark, I am going to keep looking for your family, the good ones. Maybe an aunt or a grandma. Someone must be missing you. He was silent for a long time. I thought he was asleep. Skylar. Yeah. I don't need toys, he said. His voice was thick with sleep, but the clarity of the statement cut through the room. And I don't need the big house with the glass books. I turned on my side to look at him in the faint glow of the star-shaped nightlight. His face looked peaceful for the first time. What do you need? I asked. He reached out and found my hand in the darkness. I just need you not to disappear, he said. Everyone disappears. The lady who cooked, the man who drove, they all go away. Please don't go away. My throat tightened. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. I realized then that I was not saving Milo because I was a good person. I was saving him because I knew exactly what it felt like to be disposable. My husband had looked at me and decided I was no longer necessary to his happiness. My father looked at me and saw a bad investment. My mother looked at me and saw a mistake she couldn't fix. But this boy, this little boy with the mismatched shoes and the terrified heart, he looked at me and saw the only thing in the world that mattered. He saw me. "I am not going anywhere," I whispered, squeezing his hand back. "I promise I am right here." It was a dangerous promise. I knew that. I knew that by keeping him, I was walking a razor's edge between rescue and felony. But as he drifted off to sleep, his breathing evening out into a soft rhythm, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I had chosen trouble, and for the first time in my life, trouble felt like the only honest place to stand. The next morning, the eviction notice was taped to my door, claiming I had violated the lease by having an unauthorized occupant. My landlord had seen Milo. The clock started ticking, but I did not panic. I packed our single bag. I took the divorce papers and left them in the trash. I took Milo's hand, and we walked toward the bus that would take us to Fairview, to my father's house, and to the rain that awaited us. I walked into the storm, not as a victim, but as a woman who finally had something worth fighting for. The sensation of hitting rock bottom is not a loud crash. It is a slow grinding slide that strips away your skin layer by layer until you are raw and exposed to the air. After walking away from my father's house, after the rejection that still rang in my ears like a gunshot, the reality of our situation settled over us like a shroud of lead. We were not just between places. We were out. The sequence of events that had led us to this specific sidewalk, huddled under the overhang of a closed electronics store, replayed in my mind with agonizing clarity. It had been the loss of my last temporary job that truly severed the anchor. I had been scrubbing dishes at a diner on the south side, a cash-under-the-table arrangement that barely covered food. I was 5 minutes late because I had to hide Milo in the public library before my shift. The manager, a man with grease trapped permanently under his fingernails, did not ask for an explanation. He just pointed to the door. That was $40 a day gone. Then came the paper on the door of my apartment, the eviction notice. The landlord had given us 48 hours to vacate, citing the unauthorized tenant and the missed rent. I had spent those 48 hours in a fugue state of panic and denial, packing and unpacking our single bag, trying to decide what parts of a life were essential and what parts were trash. I looked at the duffel bag resting against my leg now. Contained 2 changes of clothes for me, 3 for Milo, 2 toothbrushes, a tube of toothpaste rolled up from the bottom, a box of granola bars, and 1 piece of paper that Milo had refused to leave behind. It was a drawing he had made with a broken orange crayon on the back of a pizza flyer. It showed a stick-figure woman with long hair and a small stick-figure boy holding hands inside a square house with a triangular roof. There were no other details, just the 2 of us and the walls. It broke me every time I looked at it because I knew I could not provide the walls, only the hand. "Skylar." Milo's voice was thin, vibrating with the cold. We had moved to the central bus station because it was the only place with heat lamps that stayed on until midnight. The station was a cavern of echoing announcements and the smell of stale diesel. "I am here, Milo," I said, rubbing his arms. He looked around at the metal benches, at the vending machines glowing with artificial light, and at the people sleeping upright with their hoods pulled low. "Is this our house now?" he asked. The question was innocent, which made it cruel. "No," I said, perhaps too quickly. "No, this is not our house. This is just for tonight. Just for a few hours." I had said that phrase so many times in the last 24 hours that the words had lost their meaning. Just for tonight. It was the lie that kept us moving. We sat there for 3 hours. I watched the clock on the wall tick away the minutes of my life. I watched a security guard circle the perimeter, waking up anyone who looked too comfortable. I knew we had to stay upright. If we looked like travelers, we could stay. If we looked homeless, we would be removed. At 2 o'clock in the morning, a woman in a heavy wool coat walked past us, then stopped. She was not a passenger. She carried a clipboard and wore the lanyard of the city outreach program. My stomach dropped. It was not the same woman from the shelter, but she had the same eyes. Eyes that assessed, categorized, and judged. She approached us slowly. I pulled Milo closer, shielding him with my body. "He should be in bed," the woman said. Her tone was not unkind, but it was firm. "It is 2 o'clock in the morning. How long have you been here?" "We are waiting for a bus to Cleveland." I lied. "It is delayed." She looked at our single bag. She looked at Milo's shoes, which were still mismatched. She looked at the lack of tickets in my hand. "There are no buses to Cleveland until 6, she said. "Listen to me. I have seen you here since 10 o'clock. If you are still here when my shift ends in an hour, I have to call it in. You understand? A child cannot live in a bus station. The system will intervene to protect him." "To protect him?" I repeated, the bitterness rising in my throat like bile. "You mean to take him?" "I mean to give him a bed," she said. "Even if you can't come with him." She walked away, giving me a deadline. 1 hour, 60 minutes before the invisible machinery of the state came down to tear Milo out of my arms. I grabbed the bag. "Milo, wake up. We have to walk." We left the warmth of the station and went back out into the night. The rain had stopped, but the wind cut through our clothes. We walked without destination, moving just to keep warm, moving just to stay ahead of the help that threatened to destroy us. Milo was silent for a long time. His endurance terrified me. A normal child would whine, cry, or refuse to walk. Milo just kept pace, his small hand locked in mine. He was a soldier in a war he did not understand. "I remember," he said suddenly. We were passing the glass display window of a high-end department store. The mannequins inside were dressed in silk gowns and tuxedos frozen in a grotesque pantomime of wealth. "What do you remember?" I asked, scanning the street for police cars. "My dad," Milo said. He stopped walking and looked at the mannequins. "He has suits like that, but they are darker." I stopped. The name he had whispered in the alleyway, Vance, was still rattling in my brain, but I had been too consumed by survival to process it. Now, in the stark quiet of the street, I needed to know. "Milo," I crouched down to his level. "You told me a name before. You said Vance. Is that your dad's name?" Milo nodded. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the shop window. "Damien Vance. I remember the letters on the building.
VANCE.
It goes all the way up to the sky." I felt the blood drain from my face, and Milo hesitated, his brow furrowing as he tried to pull the words from the fog of his trauma. "People talk about him on the TV. They say he has all the money. They call him a billionaire." The word hung in the air between us. Billionaire. It seemed impossible. If this boy was the son of a billionaire, why was he wearing dirty clothes? Why had no one come for him at the community center? Why was he terrified of being found? But then I looked at his face, the structure of his jaw, the intelligence in his eyes. He did not look like a street kid. He looked like a prince who had been erased. "We need to go to the library," I said, standing up. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "To read?" Milo asked. "No," I said. "To find out who you are." We had to wait 4 hours for the main branch of the public library to open. We huddled in the doorway of a bakery, smelling the bread we could not afford, until the sun came up and the heavy metal doors of the library unlocked. I headed straight for the computer terminals. I had a library card, one of the few possessions I had managed to keep active. I sat Milo in the chair next to me with a picture book about sharks. But he did not open it. He watched the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I was afraid of what I would find. I was afraid that if I typed it, it would become real. I typed Damian Vance. The search results flooded the screen in less than a second. Millions of hits. Images of a man who looked like he was carved from granite and ice. Damian Vance, CEO of Vance Global, the richest man in the Midwest, the developer who had built Fairview Estates. I scanned the headlines. Vance Global stock soars. Damian Vance acquires tech giant. Then I added the words that made my hands shake. Missing child. The screen refreshed. The first article was dated 2 years ago. Tragedy at Vance Estate.
Billionnaires sont vanish.
I clicked the link. A news report loaded. It told the story of a kidnapping gone wrong, a ransom drop that never happened, and a police investigation that had hit a dead end. The article said the boy, Julian Vance, was presumed dead after a piece of his clothing was found near the river. And then there was the photo. It was a studio portrait. The boy in the picture was younger, cleaner, and wearing a velvet blazer. His hair was neatly combed, but the eyes were the same. The shape of the nose was the same. The way he held his chin, slightly tilted to the left, was identical to the boy sitting next to me. I turned to look at Milo. He was staring at the screen. He reached out and touched the face in the photograph. "That is me," he whispered. "But they called me Julian." He looked at the picture of the man standing next to the boy. Damian Vance. The man looked powerful, terrifying, and utterly broken. "That is my dad," Milo said. He was crying. The last time I saw him in the room with the glass books, he was crying. I sat back in the hard library chair, feeling the room spin. I was a homeless paralegal with $12 in my pocket. And sitting next to me was the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. A boy the world thought was dead. I looked around the library. Suddenly, every patron, every librarian, every security camera felt like a threat. If people knew who he was, the danger wouldn't just come from the cold or the hunger. It would come from wolves in suits. It would come from the people who had taken him in the first place. "Milo," I said, my voice barely a breath. I closed the browser window instantly. "We have to go now. Did we find the answers?" He asked as I hurried him toward the exit, my grip on his hand tight enough to bruise. "Yes," I said, pushing through the turnstile. The wind outside felt different now. It didn't just feel cold, felt malicious. I pulled him close to me on the sidewalk, looking at the skyscrapers that dominated the city skyline. Somewhere in one of those towers, a man was grieving a dead son, and somewhere else, the people who had made him disappear were walking free. "If you really are that boy," I whispered to the top of his head, "then we are not just homeless anymore. We are about to walk into a war zone." I checked my pocket for the last of my change. I had enough for 2 bus tickets to the Vance Spire in Chicago, where the headquarters pierced the clouds. I did not know if I was walking toward rescue or toward a trap. But I knew one thing. I was done running away. I was going to take the war to them. The bus ride to Chicago took every cent of the change I had scraped together, leaving us with nothing but the clothes on our backs and the terrifying weight of the truth we were carrying. When we finally stood at the base of the Vance Spire, I felt a vertigo that had nothing to do with heights. The building did not look like a place where people lived or worked. It looked like a monument to invincibility. It was a needle of steel and glass piercing the gray Illinois sky, reflecting the clouds so perfectly that the building seemed to vanish into the atmosphere, leaving only the impression of power. I looked down at Milo, or Julian, as I now knew he was named. He was clutching my hand with a grip that turned his knuckles white. He looked small, dirty, and impossibly out of place against the polished black granite of the plaza. I caught a reflection of myself in the revolving doors. My hair was matted from the humidity and the night sleeping rough. My coat was stained. We did not look like saviors returning a lost heir. We looked like debris that had washed up on the shore of a kingdom we were not allowed to enter. "Are you scared?" I asked him, my voice barely audible over the wind whipping off the lake. "Yes," he said. He did not look at the top of the tower. He looked at the revolving door. I remember the spinning glass. It made me dizzy before. "We are just going to talk," I said, trying to summon a confidence I did not feel. "We are going to make sure you are safe." We walked inside. The lobby was a cathedral of silence. It smelled of white tea and ozone. The air was conditioned to a perfect temperature that felt alien after the erratic weather outside. Our footsteps on the marble floor sounded like gunshots. Before we could make it 10 feet, 2 security guards in dark suits intercepted us. They moved with the synchronized precision of machines. One stepped in front of me, blocking my path, while the other flanked my left side. They did not draw weapons, but their posture made it clear that violence was an option they were prepared to exercise. "Ma'am," the lead guard said. He did not look at my face. He looked at the duffel bag in my hand. "This is private property. The public entrance is on the west side, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately." I tightened my grip on Milo's hand as he tried to hide behind my leg. I knew I had exactly one chance. One sentence to stop them from throwing us back onto the pavement. I channeled every ounce of my former life. The paralegal who knew how to speak to powerful men in expensive rooms. "I am not here for a tour," I said. My voice was raspy, but it did not shake. "I need to speak to Damian Vance." The guard smirked, a quick, dismissive twitch of his lip. "Mr. Vance is not available. Please turn around." He reached out to take my arm. I stepped back, pulling Milo with me, and I raised my voice so it echoed off the vaulted ceiling, freezing the few receptionists and executives crossing the lobby. "I think I found his son," I said. "I think I found Julian Vance." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, sucking the oxygen out of the massive room. The guard's hand froze in midair. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and then his eyes dropped to the boy peeking out from behind my coat. He saw the dark hair. He saw the eyes. He tapped his earpiece. "Control. We have a situation alpha in the main lobby. Hold the elevators. Get Mr. Vance's head of security down here now." 10 minutes later, we were sitting in a private holding room that cost more than my parents' entire house. The walls were paneled in rare wood and the furniture was white leather. It felt like a sterile box designed to contain contaminants. They had taken my duffel bag for screening. They had offered water and crystal glasses which sat untouched on the table. Milo sat on the edge of the sofa, swinging his legs. "Is he coming?" "I think so," I said. I was shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a cold dread. I had brought him back. I had done the right thing. So why did I feel like I had just walked into a trap? The door opened. It was not a slam, but a quiet, heavy slide. Damian Vance walked in. I had seen his pictures online, the images of the Titan, the billionaire, the man who moved markets with a tweet. But the man who walked into the room was none of those things. He was tall, yes, and he wore a suit that fit him like a second skin, but he looked hollowed out. His face was gaunt, the cheekbones sharp enough to cut. There were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of money could erase. He looked like a man who had been holding his breath for 2 years. He did not look at me. His gaze went straight to the boy on the sofa. Damian stopped in the center of the room. His hands were at his sides, and I saw them twitch. He stopped breathing. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. Julian. The name was a rasp, a sound that seemed to tear his throat. Milo looked up. He studied the man's face. He tilted his head to the side. That same gesture I had seen in the photograph. You look older, Milo said. And you are sad. Damien let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He fell to his knees. It was a shocking loss of composure for a man of his stature. He crawled the last few feet across the plush carpet, ignoring the sanctity of his suit, ignoring the security team watching from the doorway. He reached out, his hands hovering near Milo's face as if he were afraid the boy was a hallucination that would shatter if touched. "It is you," Damien whispered. Tears spilled over his lashes, tracking down his cheeks. "My God, it is you." Milo hesitated, then reached out and touched Damien's wet cheek. "I remember the room," Milo said softly. "The one with the glass walls and the books. You used to read to me there." Damien closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against Milo's small, dirty shoulder. He wept. It was a raw, ugly sound of grief turning into relief. For a moment, the billionaire was gone. There was only a father who had been living in hell. Finally seeing the light, I stood in the corner, pressing my back against the wall, trying to make myself invisible. I felt like an intruder on a holy moment. My heart ached for them, for the reunion, for the beautiful, impossible fact that Milo was home. But the moment did not last. Damien took a deep, shuddering breath. He pulled back, gripping Milo's shoulders, scanning him for injuries. He saw the mismatched shoes. He saw the dirt under Milo's fingernails. He saw the cheap, thin coat I had bought from a thrift store. The softness in Damien's face began to harden. The grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp confusion. He stood up, towering over the room again. He wiped his face with a handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. And when he turned to look at me, the father was gone. The CEO was back. His eyes were gray like steel in winter, and they dissected me. He looked at my worn boots. He looked at my unwashed hair. He looked at the exhaustion etched into my skin. "Who are you?" he asked. The voice was low. "Dangerous. My name is Skylar Parker," I said. I tried to stand taller, but his presence was suffocating. "Skylar Parker," he repeated, testing the name like he was tasting poison. "And tell me, Ms. Parker, why has my son, who has been missing for 730 days, suddenly appeared in your custody?" "I found him," I said, 3 days ago at the Fairview Community Center. He was alone in the waiting room. "Fairview Community Center," Damien said flatly. "A public facility and you just took him." "He was terrified," I said, my voice rising in defense. "He asked me not to let them take him. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he needed help." "So, you took a child from a community center without alerting the authorities." Damien stepped closer. "You kept him for 3 days. You did not call the police. You did not call the hotline." "I tried to search for him," I said. "There were no matches on the recent missing persons list. He didn't remember his name until last night." Damien laughed, but it was a dry, humorless sound. "He didn't remember his name, but you managed to bring him straight to my headquarters. Did you figure out who he was before or after you realized how much a reward might be worth?" The accusation hit me like a physical slap. "I don't want your money," I snapped. "I brought him here because he remembered you. I brought him here because it was the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Damien sneered. "You look like you are starving, Ms. Parker. You look like you haven't slept in a bed in a week. Desperate people don't do the right thing. They do the profitable thing." Before I could answer, the door opened again. This time it was an invasion. 4 men and 2 women in sharp gray suits marched in. Lawyers. They carried briefcases and tablets, their faces masks of professional detachment. Behind them were 2 police officers. "Mr. Vance," one of the lawyers said, "we have secured the perimeter. We need to move Julian to the medical suite for DNA verification and a physical. We need to debrief the subject. He pointed at me. The subject, I repeated. I am a person. You are a suspect, Damien said. He turned to the security team. Take my son to the medical wing. Keep her here. I want a full background check. I want to know every address she has ever lived at, every debt she owes, every person she has spoken to in the last year. One of the guards stepped toward Milo. Come on.
Son.
Let's go get some ice cream. Milo looked at the guard, then at Damien, then at me. Panic flared in his eyes. He scrambled off the sofa and ran. Not to his father, but to me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in my coat.
No, Milo screamed.
I am not going. Don't make me go. Julian, Damien said, his voice softening, pleading. It is okay. You are safe now. She has to go.
No, Milo shouted.
His voice cracking. She saved me. She is the only one who didn't leave. You can't make her go. If she goes, I go. The room froze. The lawyers looked at Damien. The guards hesitated. I stood there, my hands resting instinctively on Milo's head, feeling the tremors running through his small body. I looked at Damien over his son's head. I am not the villain here, Mr. Vance, I said quietly. I am the only reason he is standing in this room. Damien stared at us. He looked at the way his son clung to this strange, disheveled woman. He looked at the fierce protection in my eyes. He was a man used to controlling everything, but he could not control this. He saw the bond we had formed in the trenches of poverty, a bond his money could not replicate. He clenched his jaw, the muscles jumping. He looked at his head lawyer. She stays, Damien said. Sir, the lawyer objected. She is a potential kidnapper. She is a liability. The protocols. I said she stays, Damien roared. The power in his voice cracked the sterile atmosphere. He pointed a finger at me. She does not leave this building. She goes where Julian goes. But she is not a guest. She is under watch. He walked up to me close enough that I could smell the expensive cologne masking the scent of his fear. His eyes were cold again. You will stay, Ms. Parker, because if my son wants you, he gets you. But mark my words, I will find out who you are. And if I find out you had anything to do with taking him or if you hurt him in any way, he didn't finish the threat. He didn't have to. Take them upstairs, Damien ordered. As the guards ushered us out of the room, flanked by lawyers, we walked past a large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall of the lobby. It was tuned to a 24-hour news network. My blood ran cold. The headline was already flashing in bold red letters across the bottom of the screen. Breaking news. Billionaire Damien Vance reunited with missing son. And then the image changed. It was a grainy photo taken from a cell phone, likely by someone in the lobby. Just minutes ago, it showed me hair wild, coat dirty, holding Milo's hand as we faced the security guards. The caption read, Mystery Woman Returns. Savior or kidnapper? I looked at Damien. He was staring at the screen, too. His face unreadable. The world knew. My family would know. Trent would know. And the people who had taken Milo in the first place. They would know exactly where we were. I had walked into the glass tower to save a boy. But as the elevator doors closed, sealing us in, I realized I had just locked myself in a cage with a lion. While the hyenas circled outside, the silence of the penthouse suite was a lie. It was designed to feel peaceful with its triple-paned glass reducing the roar of Chicago to a mute cinematic backdrop and its white marble floors cooling the air to a constant sterile 68 degrees. But inside that silence, the world was screaming at me. I sat on the edge of a bed that cost more than my college tuition, staring at the tablet one of Damien Vance's assistants had left on the side table. I had been instructed not to go online. I had been told to let the professionals handle the narrative. But I was not a woman who let others write her story anymore. So I had opened the browser. The image was everywhere. It was grainy low-light footage taken by a bystander in the lobby just hours ago. It showed me hair wild and frizzy from the humidity, coat stained with city grime, standing protectively in front of Milo Julian. My hand was on his chest. My face was twisted in a snarl of defiance directed at the security guards. To me, it looked like love. To the internet, it looked like a hostage situation. Vance Found was trending #1 globally. But the subthreads were where the poison lived. Look at her eyes, one comment read, liked by 4,000 people. That is not a savior. That is a meth head looking for a payout. She kidnapped him. Another wrote, she probably took him 2 years ago and got cold feet when the money ran out. Lock her up. Gold digger. She is holding on to him like he is a winning lottery ticket. I scrolled, my fingers trembling, until I felt a wave of nausea so potent I had to put the tablet face down. They had stripped me of my humanity in less than 3 hours. I was no longer Skylar Parker, the woman who had shared her last granola bar with a shivering child. I was a villain, a caricature of poverty and greed. I looked across the room. Milo was asleep on the massive sofa, curled into a tight ball under a cashmere throw. Even in sleep, he looked ready to run. The door to our suite was locked from the outside. A security guard stood in the hallway. We were guests, Damien had said, but we were prisoners. Then the second wave of attacks began, and this time it did not come from strangers. A notification popped up on the screen. It was a link to a breaking news article from a local Ohio paper, quickly picked up by the national syndicates. Exclusive, the troubled past of the Vance savior. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tapped the link. The source was anonymous, cited only as a close family member. But as I read the words, I could hear my brother's voice dripping from every sentence. Skylar has always been unstable, the source claimed. She was recently fired for incompetence and erratic behavior. She is going through a messy divorce and has significant gambling debts. We have been worried about her mental state for months. We just hope she hasn't harmed that poor boy. Gambling debts. I had never gambled a day in my life. The debt was the credit card bill Derek had racked up in my name before he vanished. Erratic behavior. That was Trent's code for me refusing to let him borrow money I didn't have. Trent was feeding them lies. He was building a narrative that discredited me before I could even open my mouth. He was painting me as crazy so that anything I said about the HOA would be dismissed. It is the truth, I pleaded. But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. It sounded like a lie. It sounded like a conspiracy. And then the memory hit me. The memory of the rainy porch. The memory of my father standing in the doorway looking at Milo with that micro-expression of disgust. And the words he had spoken to Trent. Your sister isn't worth a penny. She's done. I had thought he meant I was financially worthless. I had thought he meant I was a failure. But now, standing in the cold light of the courthouse hallway, the horrific realization washed over me. He hadn't been talking about my bank account. He had been talking about my utility. They had seen me with the boy. They had realized I had accidentally picked up the very evidence that could destroy them. And instead of helping me, instead of panicking, my father had calculated the odds in a split second. He had thrown me out. He had told me to take the boy and leave. He wasn't kicking out a daughter. He was discarding a loose end. He had sent me out into the rain with the boy, hoping we would both disappear into the cracks of the city, hoping the cold or the hunger would finish what Trent had started. My father, I whispered, horror choking me. He knew. He saw Milo and he told me to take him away. Damien grabbed my arm. His grip was bruising. What did you say? He knew, I said. looking up at Damien with eyes that I knew were full of terror. They didn't just kidnap him. Damien, my family. They tried to throw us both away to cover it up. The detective stepped forward, his hand resting on his weapon.
Mom.
I am going to need you to come with me right now. I looked at the closed door where Milo was waiting. I looked at the man who wanted to destroy me, and I realized that the court hearing was over. The custody battle was over. The war had just begun. The conference room we had been moved to was smaller than the holding suite, stripped of luxury and filled instead with the suffocating pressure of evidence. Detective Miller threw a file onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished surface and stopped inches from my hand. "Open it," Miller said. I opened the folder. Inside was a grainy black and white photograph taken from a traffic camera. It showed a nondescript white cargo van turning onto a service road. The timestamp in the corner read 21:17 in the morning, exactly 2 years ago. The location was the access road 3 miles south of the Vance estate. "We missed this the first time," Miller said, his voice tight with the frustration of a man who realized he had been looking at the puzzle upside down for 24 months. The plates were covered with mud. Standard procedure for professionals. But modern enhancement software is a beautiful thing. He tapped the second photo. It was a blown-up, sharpened image of the license plate. The van was registered to a shell corporation called Apex Logistics. On paper, it moves restaurant supplies, but when we pulled the corporate charter and followed the money through 3 different holding companies, we found the signatory for the insurance bond. He looked at Damien, then at me. "The bond was signed by Trent Parker," Miller said, VP of Operations for Parker & Sons. The room spun. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep upright. "That is impossible," I said. My voice sounded thin, like paper tearing. "Trent is boring. He plays golf. He worries about his cholesterol. He doesn't kidnap children." "He didn't kidnap the child," Miller corrected. "He facilitated the transport. That van was used to move Julian from the drop site to the secondary location. Your brother provided the wheels." I shook my head, trying to reconcile the image of my brother. The man who stood in the kitchen drinking whiskey and complaining about union fees with a monster who would traffic a human being. But then the pieces began to click into place with the sickening sound of a cell door slamming shut. I remembered the way Trent had looked at Milo on the porch. It hadn't been confusion. It hadn't even been surprise. It had been recognition. "Why?" Damien asked. He was standing by the window, his back to us, vibrating with a rage so potent it made the air in the room feel heavy. "Why would a logistics company in Ohio target my son?" "Money," Miller said simply. "Parker & Sons has been quietly underwater for 3 years. They lost the interstate contract. They were facing bankruptcy. A ransom payout of $20 million would have saved the empire, but they never asked for the ransom." Damien turned around. His eyes were red-rimmed. "The drop went wrong. The instructions were never sent because the team they hired fell apart," Miller said. "And that brings us to the second piece of evidence." He pulled out another sheet of paper. It was a log of phone calls. We ran a cross-reference of every phone number that pinged off the cell towers near the Vance estate on the night of the abduction. We found a burner phone that made 6 calls between midnight and 4 in the morning. Miller slid the paper toward me. "Do you recognize this number, Ms. Parker?" I looked at the number listed in the incoming column. It was a landline. I knew it by heart. It was the direct internal line to my father's home office. The office where children were never allowed. "That is my father's desk," I whispered. "And do you know who bought the burner phone that called it?" Miller asked. I stared at him. "We traced the point of sale to a convenience store in downtown Chicago. We pulled the credit card receipt. It was a small transaction, just the phone and a pack of cigarettes." Miller dropped the receipt on the table. The name on the card was printed in fading blue ink. Derek Sloan. My lungs seized. Couldn't inhale. Derek, my ex-husband.
No, Igaspat.
I met Derek 2 years ago. We met at a coffee shop. He spilled his drink on me. It was an accident. Was it? Miller asked gently. Look at the date on the receipt, Skylar. Look at the date of the abduction. I looked. The receipt was dated 3 days before Julian Vance disappeared. I met Derek 2 weeks after that. A cold horror washed over me, starting at my scalp and moving down to my toes. It wasn't a romance. It wasn't a whirlwind courtship. It was an assignment. I remembered the early days of our relationship. Derek was charming, attentive, and always asking questions about my family. He wanted to know when Trent was in town. He wanted to know if my father ever talked about the business. I had thought he was just interested in my life. I remembered the nights he would come home late, smelling of stress and sweat, talking about a big deal that was going to change everything. We are going to be set for life, Sky. I just have to wait for the payout. I just have to keep the cargo safe. I had thought he was talking about drugs or stolen cars. I never imagined the cargo was a 5-year-old boy. He was watching me. I whispered. The realization made me want to vomit. My family. They knew Derek was involved. They knew he was the one holding Julian and they let him marry me. It was the perfect cover. Miller said, if the police ever looked at Derek, he had a legitimate tie to the Parker family. He wasn't a co-conspirator. He was just the son-in-law. And if things went south, well, they had you to take the fall. They kept their enemies close and their scapegoats closer. I thought about the divorce. Derek hadn't just left because he was tired of me. He left because the money never came. The ransom was botched. The cargo escaped. And when Milo ran away from the van, Derek knew the game was over. He cleaned out my bank account and ran. And my father knew. When I showed up on his porch with Milo, he didn't see a stray kid. He saw the evidence that could send him to prison for the rest of his life. That was why he didn't call the police. That was why he threw me out into the rain. Your sister isn't worth a penny. She's done. He wasn't cutting me off. He was cutting me loose. He was hoping the cold would kill us both before I figured out the truth. Damien walked over to the table. He placed his hands on the wood and leaned in until his face was inches from mine. You lived with one of them, Damien said. His voice was a low hiss. You slept in the same bed as the man who took my son. You ate dinner with the brother who arranged the transport. I didn't know, I cried. Damien, please, you have to believe me. I was the mark. I was the fool. Ignorance is not a defense, Damien shouted. He slammed his hand on the table, making the files jump. If your family is involved in this, if you are part of this web, you are going to be pulled down with them. I will bury every single person who carries the name Parker. I will dismantle your father's company brick by brick. I will ensure none of you ever see the sun again. He stared at me, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to defend them, waiting for me to play the loyal daughter or the confused wife. But something inside me had snapped. The last thread of loyalty I held for the people who raised me had been severed by the image of that receipt. They had sold me. They had used my life as a blind for their crimes. I looked Damien in the eye. I stopped shaking. Do it, I said. Damien blinked. What? Pull it down, I said. My voice was hard, unrecognizable to my own ears. Burn it all to the ground. If my family did this, if they hurt that little boy to cover their debts, then I don't want to be saved. I would rather be dragged down with the truth than live one more second in their silence. I turned to Detective Miller. I know where Derek keeps his passwords, I said. I know the code to his cloud storage. He thought I was too stupid to notice when he typed it in, but I watched him. I know where Trent keeps the off-book ledgers. He keeps them in a safe at the hunting cabin in Wisconsin. I can draw you a map. You are willing to testify? Miller asked, pulling out a notepad. You are willing to go on record against your father and your brother. You know this will destroy your life. Skylar. My life was destroyed the minute they decided I was disposable, I said. I am done protecting them. I want to give you everything. For the next 2 hours, I did not stop talking. I gave them the dates of family dinners where the mood was tense. I gave them the emails Derek had sent from my laptop when he thought I was asleep. I gave them the name of the business partner Trent met with on Sundays, a man I now realized was likely a fixer for the criminal underworld. I handed over my phone. I gave them access to my email, my bank records, my entire digital history. I stripped myself bare in that room, offering up every secret I had ever held just to prove that I was not one of them. Damien sat in the corner watching me. He didn't speak. He just watched, his expression shifting from suspicion to a grudging, painful respect. He saw me tearing my own heart out to help him find justice for his son. There is one more thing, I said, my throat raw from talking. Derek, he sent me a text yesterday. He tried to blackmail me. Show me, Miller said. I pulled up the message. Miller read it, then handed the phone to a tech specialist who had entered the room. Trace it, Miller ordered. Now the tech plugged my phone into a laptop. Lines of code scrolled down the screen. The room was silent. The only sound, the hum of the hard drive. Got him, the tech said after 3 minutes. The phone is on. GPS is active. Where is he? Damien demanded, stepping forward. He is moving, the tech said. He is on I-90 heading east. He is passing Gary, Indiana. Speed is 80 mph. He is running, Miller said. He grabbed his radio. Dispatch. This is Miller. I need a priority intercept on I-90 eastbound. Suspect is Derek Sloan. He is a flight risk involved in a Class A felony kidnapping. Consider him desperate. Miller looked at me. He is trying to cross state lines. If he gets to the East Coast, he could vanish. We have to catch him now. He has a go bag, I said, remembering a black backpack Derek always kept in the trunk of his car. He keeps cash and a passport in the lining of his spare tire. He showed me once. He said it was for emergencies. Miller nodded to his team. Get the Indiana State Police on the line. Tell them to check the spare tire. As the detectives rushed out of the room to coordinate the takedown, I remained seated at the table. I felt lightheaded, hollowed out. I had just signed the warrant for my family's destruction. Damien walked over to me. He didn't touch me, but he stood close enough that I could feel his heat. You just sent your ex-husband to prison, he said quietly. And probably your brother, too. They sent themselves, I said, looking at the grain of the wood table. I just turned on the lights. Why? Damien asked. Why destroy your own blood for a stranger? I looked up at him. I thought of Milo screaming for me in the courtroom. I thought of the way his hand felt in mine, small, trusting, and warm. Because Milo is not a stranger, I said. He is the only family I have left. The door opened. Miller stuck his head back in. We have visual, he said, his voice grim. State troopers are initiating a traffic stop near mile marker 21. He isn't pulling over. We are in a pursuit. I closed my eyes. The war wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It was on the highway, screaming at 80 mph toward a violent end. And I knew with a terrifying certainty that Derek would not go quietly. He had too much to lose. And now, thanks to me, he had nowhere left to hide. The interrogation room at the precinct was a world away from the sterile luxury of the Vance Spire. It was a box of cinder blocks painted a suffocating shade of beige, smelling of stale coffee and fear. On one side of the metal table sat Derek Sloan, my ex-husband. He was still wearing the clothes he had been arrested in, a wrinkled polo shirt and jeans that were now stained with the grease of the highway. His hands were cuffed to the table, but his posture was relaxed, almost bored. I stood on the other side of the one-way glass in the observation room. Detective Miller stood beside me, his arms crossed. "You don't have to go in there, Skylar," Miller said. "We can handle this." "I need to look him in the eye," I said. "I need to know which parts of my life were real and which parts were just a long con." Miller nodded to the uniformed officer at the door. "5 minutes. I will be right there with you." When I walked into the room, Derek didn't flinch. He looked up slowly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. That same lopsided smile that had charmed me 2 years ago. The smile I had thought was shy, but now recognized as practiced. "Well, look at you," Derek said, leaning back as far as the chains would allow. "You look tired, babe. But then again, you always did take things too seriously." I pulled out the metal chair opposite him and sat down. My hands were shaking, so I placed them flat on the table to steady them. "Where were you going, Derek?" I asked. "New York. Montreal. I was just taking a drive," he said, his eyes dancing with amusement. "It is a free country, or it was until your new billionaire boyfriend decided to lock down the interstate." "Stop it," I said, my voice low and hard. "We know about the van. We know about the phone calls to my father's office. We know everything." Derek's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you know everything? That is your problem, Skylar. You always think the world is black and white. You still like playing the hero, don't you? Saving the stray dog. Saving the lost boy." "I saved a child you stole," I said. "Stole is a harsh word," Derek said, shifting in his seat. "Let's say I acquired an asset that was being mishandled." He leaned forward, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I didn't grab him from the yard, Skylar. I wasn't part of the snatch team. That was a couple of amateurs your brother hired out of Detroit. They panicked when the heat got too high. They were going to dump the kid in the river." My stomach turned over. "So, you admit Trent hired them?" "Trent is a logistics man," Derek said, shrugging. "He moves things. Crates, pallets, people. He saw an opportunity to solve the company's cash flow problem. But when his hired muscle got cold feet, someone had to step in and clean up the mess. That was me. I took the kid. I kept him safe. I put a roof over his head." "You kept him in a basement," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. "You kept him prisoner for 2 years while his father died inside." "I was waiting for the market to stabilize," Derek snapped back, his facade cracking. "Trent wanted to rush the ransom. I told him to wait. I told him if we waited, the price would go up. We were partners, Skylar. Trent provided the resources and I provided the containment. It was a business arrangement." "And me?" I asked, feeling the tears burning my eyes. "What was I? Was I a business arrangement, too?" Derek looked at me with a pity that was more cutting than his anger. "You were the perfect cover, Sky. Who suspects the son-in-law of the vice president? Marrying you gave me access. It gave me a reason to be at the dinners, to listen to the phone calls. You were my alibi." I felt like I had been hollowed out with a spoon. Every memory of our marriage, the laughter, the quiet nights, the plans for the future, it was all just camouflage for a monster. But I had one question left. The question that had been haunting me since I walked off my parents' porch. "Trent is weak," I said. "He couldn't pull this off alone. And he wouldn't dare move a muscle without approval." I looked deep into Derek's eyes. Did my father know? The room went silent. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to roar in my ears. Derek looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't smirk. He didn't lie. He simply looked away, staring at the concrete wall to his left. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just let the silence stretch out between us. Heavy and suffocating, that silence told me everything. My father, Gordon Parker, the man who demanded excellence and honor, had not only known, he had likely sanctioned it. He had weighed the life of a child against the solvency of his company, and he had chosen the money. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You are going to die in prison, Derek," I said quietly, "and I am going to be the one who testifies at your parole hearing to make sure you never get out." "Skylar, wait," Derek called out as I turned to the door, a sudden desperation in his voice. "We can cut a deal. I have information on the offshore accounts. I can help you." I walked out and the heavy steel door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. I walked back into the observation area. Damien was there. He had been listening to every word. His face was a mask of fury so intense it looked painful. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. In the corner of the room on a small bench sat Milo. A social worker was with him, but she looked helpless. Milo was rocking back and forth, his hands over his ears. He had heard Damien shouting before I entered. He had felt the rage in the air. "I will kill them," Damien snarled, staring at the glass where Derek sat. "I will kill every single one of them with my bare hands." He turned and kicked a metal trash can. It flew across the room and crashed into the wall with a deafening bang.
No!
Milo screamed. The boy curled into a tight ball, making himself as small as physically possible. He wasn't seeing his father. He was seeing violence. He was seeing the men who had taken him. Damien froze, realizing what he had done. But he was too angry, too flooded with adrenaline to shift gears. He stood there, panting, looking terrifying. I moved instantly. I didn't go to Damien. I went to Milo. I dropped to my knees on the dirty tile floor and wrapped my arms around the boy. I pulled him against my chest, covering his ears with my hands, shielding him from the sight of his father's rage. "It is okay," I whispered into his hair. "It is just a noise. It is just a trash can. You are safe. I have got you. I am right here." Milo was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "He is mad," Milo sobbed. "Everyone is mad. He is just sad and angry," I soothed. "But he is not angry at you. Look at me, Milo. Look at me." He looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. "I am not leaving," I said. "I am the wall. Nothing gets past me. Okay?" He nodded, burying his face in my neck. I looked up at Damien. He was staring at us, his chest heaving. The anger was draining out of him, replaced by a crushing shame. He saw what I was doing. I was protecting his son from him. "I am sorry," Damien whispered. Before he could say more, the door to the hallway opened. Detective Miller stepped in, followed by a man in a pristine gray suit. I didn't recognize him, but I recognized the pin on his lapel. It was the Parker Sons Company logo. It was Arthur Blackwood, my father's personal attorney. "Ms. Parker," Blackwood said, his voice oily and smooth. "I was hoping we could have a private word." I stood up, keeping one hand on Milo's shoulder. "I have nothing to say to you, Arthur." "I think you do," Blackwood said. He glanced at Damien, then at the police officers. "Your father is very distressed by the current situation. He believes there has been a terrible misunderstanding regarding his involvement." "There is no misunderstanding," I said. "Derek just confirmed it." "The testimony of a desperate criminal is hardly proof," Blackwood said dismissively. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin blue folder. "However, the family wishes to avoid a protracted legal battle that would be painful for everyone. We are prepared to offer a settlement." He held the folder out to me. "A comprehensive non-disclosure agreement," Blackwood explained. "In exchange for your silence regarding the internal operations of Parker and Sons, and your immediate recusal from this investigation, the family is prepared to offer you a one-time payment of $2 million and, of course, full reinstatement of your trust fund. The room went deadly silent. Damien looked at the lawyer with disbelief. Miller stepped forward, ready to intervene, but I held up my hand. I looked at the folder. $2 million. It was enough to vanish, enough to start over anywhere in the world. I looked at Arthur Blackwood. I remembered him coming to my 10th birthday party. I remembered him smiling at my wedding. He was part of the machinery that had ground me down. My father threw me out in the rain, I said, my voice trembling with a cold fury. He looked at his grandson, or the boy he should have treated like a grandson, and he told my brother that I wasn't worth a penny. I stepped closer to Blackwood. He said I was done. He said I had zero value. I took the folder from his hand. The paper felt heavy, expensive. You can't put a price tag on a human being, Arthur. You think you can buy me? You think $2 million buys the 2 years that boy spent in a basement? You think it buys the soul my father sold? I ripped the folder in half. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping. I don't want his money, I said, throwing the pieces at Blackwood's feet. I want his handcuffs. Get out of my sight. Blackwood's face turned a pale shade of gray. He looked at Damien, who was watching me with a look of awe. He looked at Miller, who was smirking. You are making a mistake, Skylar, Blackwood hissed. You are declaring war on your own blood. The war started a long time ago, I said. I just finally decided to fight back. Blackwood turned and fled the room. As the door swung shut, Detective Miller's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and then looked at me. A grim smile spread across his face. That was the team at the warehouse, Miller said. It seems your memory of the safe location was perfect. Skylar, what did they find? Damien asked, stepping forward. They found the ledger, Miller said. But they found something better. They found a series of wire transfers scheduled for next week. Payments from a shell company owned by Gordon Parker to an account in the Cayman Islands registered to Derek Sloan. Miller looked at me. The payment reference wasn't for logistics, he said. It was labeled cleanup costs. We have the smoking gun, Skylar. We have the money trail linking your father directly to the hush money. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was over. The secret was out. My testimony had just given them the key to lock my father away. Damien walked over to me. He looked at Milo, who was now sitting calmly on the bench. And then he looked at me. You just turned down $2 million, Damien said quietly. I told you, I said, looking at the boy who was watching us with wide, trusting eyes. I am not for sale. Damien nodded slowly. I know. And I'm starting to realize neither is my son. We owe you everything. Skylar, you don't owe me anything, I said. Just promise me you won't become like them. Promise me you won't let the money turn you into a monster. I promise, Damien said. And for the first time, I believed him. Now, Miller said, holstering his phone, let's go arrest a CEO. The atmosphere outside the Cook County Family Court had shifted overnight. When I had walked up these steps 48 hours ago, the air had been thick with accusation. The photographers had looked at me like I was prey, snapping pictures of the homeless kidnapper to sell to the highest bidder. But today, the wind was blowing in a different direction. The police press conference at 6 o'clock in the morning had changed everything. They had released the details of the Apex Logistics investigation. They had released the name of the shell company. They had released the timeline. I was no longer the villain. I was the woman who had stumbled onto a crime scene that had been festering for 2 years. I stepped out of the black SUV Damien had sent for me. The flashbulbs erupted, but the questions shouted from behind the barricades were different now. Skylar, did you know your brother was involved? Ms. Parker, Are you going to testify against your father? Skylar, look this way. The hero of the hour. I ignored them. I kept my head high, wearing a navy blue suit that Damien's stylist had brought to the hotel. It was armor. I wasn't hiding in a hoodie anymore. Damien was waiting for me at the top of the stairs. He looked formidable, his grief replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. He nodded to me, a silent acknowledgement of the alliance we had forged in the fire of the interrogation room. But the real drama was unfolding 10 feet away. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. My father, Gordon Parker, stepped out. He adjusted his tie, trying to project the image of the unshakable CEO, the pillar of the community. He looked calm, but I knew him. I saw the way his fingers twitched against his thigh. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip despite the cool morning air. Behind him, my brother Trent stepped out. He didn't make it to the stairs. Detective Miller and 2 uniformed officers moved with the speed of a striking cobra. They intercepted Trent on the sidewalk right in front of the bank of television cameras. Trent Parker, Miller said, his voice carrying over the crowd noise. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, extortion, and interstate trafficking of a minor. The crowd gasped. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was louder than a gunshot. Trent's face went white. He looked at our father. Dad, do something. Gordon Parker froze. He looked at his son. Then he looked at the cameras. He saw the red lights of the recording equipment. He saw the end of his legacy. Remain silent. Trent, Gordon said, his voice tight and devoid of emotion. We will call the lawyers. He didn't reach out. He didn't step in. He watched his son get shoved into the back of a squad car like a common criminal. And then he turned and walked up the stairs. He passed me without stopping. But as he passed, I saw his eyes. They were wide, frantic, darting back and forth like a trapped animal. He was trying to hold up the sky, but he knew and I knew that the ceiling was already coming down. Inside courtroom 304 the silence was heavy. This was not a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. Judge Hollowell sat on the bench. Her expression grim. She had read the police reports. She knew that the custody battle was no longer about whether I was fit to be around Milo. It was about saving him from the people who shared my last name. Damien took the stand first. His lawyer Sterling asked him a simple question. Mr. Vance, do you believe Ms. Parker poses a threat to your son? Damien looked at me. He looked at the woman he had threatened to destroy yesterday. No, Damien said firmly. I believe she is the only reason my son is alive. He turned to the judge. We failed him, Damien said, his voice cracking slightly. My security team failed. The police failed. I failed. For 2 years, we looked at charts and graphs and hired experts. But Ms. Parker didn't have experts. She had nothing. She had no money, no home, and every reason to walk away. But she didn't. Damien took a breath. She saved him when all of us with all our billions could not. To call her a danger is an insult to the definition of safety. When I took the stand, I did not look at my father, who was sitting in the back row with his high-priced legal team. I looked at Milo. He was sitting with the court advocate, drawing on a notepad. He looked small, but he wasn't shaking today. Ms. Parker, the judge asked, can you tell the court in your own words why you did not contact the authorities immediately? I leaned into the microphone. I didn't use legal jargon. I didn't try to sound smart. I just told the truth. I was afraid, I said. I was afraid because I have seen how the system works. I was afraid that if I let go of his hand, he would become a case number. And I knew that he didn't need a case number. He needed a person. I talked about the bus station. I talked about the cold metal bench and the way the wind cut through our clothes. I talked about splitting the granola bar and the way Milo had whispered that he didn't want the toys. He just didn't want to be invisible. I didn't have a plan, I said. I didn't have resources. I just knew that he was terrified of being taken away. So I made a choice. I chose to be cold so he could be warm. I chose to be hungry so he could eat. I didn't do it to be a hero. I did it because when a child holds your hand and asks you not to let go, you don't let go. I looked at my father then. You don't throw them out in the rain, I added. The courtroom was silent. The stenographer's typing was the only sound. Then it was Milo's turn. The judge cleared the courtroom of unnecessary personnel, but she allowed the primary parties to stay. She walked down from her high bench and sat at the table near him, removing her black robe to look less intimidating. "Hello, Julian," she said gently. "I am Milo," he corrected her. "Okay, Milo," she smiled. "I just have one question for you. Do you feel safe with your dad?" Milo looked at Damien. "Yes, he cries a lot now, but he is nice." Damien offered a watery smile. "And how do you feel about Skylar?" the judge asked. Milo put down his crayon. He looked at me. "I am not scared of Skylar," he said. His voice was clear, bell-like in the quiet room. "She is the only one who didn't lie. The bad man said he was taking me home, but he took me to the basement. Skylar said we were going to be cold, and we were. She tells the truth." He looked at the judge. "I am not scared of her. I am scared of being left behind. I am scared she will go away because I am back in the big house." The judge nodded slowly. She stood up and put her robe back on. She returned to the bench and looked at the papers in front of her. "The court is ready to rule," she said. But before she could speak, there was a commotion in the back. My father stood up. "Your Honor," Gordon said, his voice trembling with a desperate attempt at authority. "If I may approach the bench, there are family matters that need to be discussed." "Sit down, Mr. Parker," the judge said sharply. "You are not a party to this case. In fact, based on the reports on my desk, you are lucky you are not currently in a holding cell." Gordon wilted. He sat down, his face a mask of gray ash. The judge looked at us. "It is the ruling of this court that full legal and physical custody of the minor child, Julian Vance, be returned immediately to his father, Damien Vance." She paused. "However, the court also recognizes the extraordinary bond formed between the child and Ms. Skylar Parker. The psychological evaluation indicates that severing this bond abruptly would cause significant emotional harm to the child. Therefore, the court grants Ms. Parker visitation rights to be coordinated with Mr. Vance and orders that she remain a central part of the child's transition therapy team." She looked at me. "Furthermore, the court is issuing a permanent order of protection for Ms. Parker against Derek Sloan, and let the record show that this court finds no fault in Ms. Parker's actions. She is fully exonerated of any wrongdoing." The gavel banged. It was a sharp final sound. It was over. As the courtroom cleared, I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my spirit felt lighter than air. My father approached me near the aisle. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The titan of industry was gone. In his place was an old man who knew the wolves were circling. "Skylar," he whispered. He tried to smile, but it was a grimace. "This is a good result for the boy." I looked at him. I didn't feel hate anymore. I felt nothing. "Skylar," he continued, stepping closer so the reporters outside wouldn't hear. "We need to talk about the testimony, about the company. If you testify about the internal finances, it will destroy everything, the legacy, your mother's house." He reached into his pocket. "I can set you up," he hissed urgently. 5 million. 10. Just soften the blow. Say you were confused about the dates. We can say Trent acted alone. We can save the family name." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had defined my worth by my bank account for 36 years. The family name? I asked. The name is already dead. Dad, you killed it when you signed off on that hush money. Please, he begged, his dignity shattering. You are my daughter. You can't leave me with nothing. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. I am not leaving you with nothing, I said. I am leaving you with exactly what you gave me. I leaned in. I don't need a penny of your money, Dad. I have something you will never have again. I have a clean conscience. I turned my back on him. It was the hardest and easiest thing I had ever done. I walked toward the exit. Damien was waiting there with Milo. Milo ran to me and hugged my legs. Are you coming? Milo asked. I am coming, I said. I am going to help you settle in. We walked out of the heavy double doors and into the blinding light of the lobby. The press was waiting. 100 microphones were thrust in our direction, but they weren't looking at me. They were looking past me. My father had followed us out. He stood in the doorway looking lost. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune, a sharp-eyed woman who smelled blood in the water, shouted a question that cut through the noise like a knife. Mr. Parker, she yelled. The police say the ransom vehicle was registered to your company 2 years ago. My father stopped. He looked at the cameras. Mr. Parker, another reporter shouted. You threw your daughter out when she brought the boy home. You saw the missing heir and you turned him away. The questions were coming faster now. A barrage of accusations. How long did you know? The first reporter screamed, her voice rising above the rest. Mr. Parker, look at the camera. How long did you know your company was funding a kidnapping? My father opened his mouth to speak. He wanted to spin it. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say it was a mistake. A rogue employee. A misunderstanding. But he looked at me. I was standing next to Damien Vance, holding the hand of the boy he had tried to discard. I was standing in the light. He was standing in the shadow of the courthouse door. He realized then that there was no spin left. There was no deal to be made. He closed his mouth. His eyes went dead. He stood there frozen, a statue of a man crumbling under the weight of his own greed. He couldn't answer, and his silence was the loudest sound in the world. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung open, and the world exploded into white light. I blinked against the sudden assault of flashbulbs. It felt as if the sun itself had descended onto the concrete steps of Cook County Family Court. But it was not the sun. It was the collective gaze of a city that had spent the last 48 hours dissecting my life for a heartbeat. The old instinct to hide flared up in my chest. I wanted to duck my head. I wanted to pull a hood over my face and vanish into the cracks of the sidewalk, just as I had done on that rainy night in Ohio when my father told me I was finished. But then I felt a presence beside me. It was solid, immovable, and reassuring. Damien Vance did not walk ahead of me to clear a path, and he did not walk behind me to push me forward. He walked exactly at my side. He shortened his long strides to match mine, ensuring that when we emerged onto the landing, we stood as a united front. The noise was deafening. Reporters were shouting over one another, a cacophony of questions that merged into a wall of sound. Ms. Parker, is it true you turned down a settlement? Mr. Vance, are you pressing charges against the Parker family? Skylar, look here. Just one smile. I looked out at the sea of microphones and cameras. I saw the vans with their satellite dishes extended. I saw the curious onlookers pressed against the barricades. And then, at the periphery of my vision, I saw my father. Gordon Parker was standing near the bottom of the steps. He had been trying to make a dignified exit, but the sheer volume of the press had boxed him in. He looked trapped. His face, usually flushed with the arrogance of control, was now the color of old parchment. He was watching me. He was watching the daughter he had discarded, standing shoulder to shoulder with the man who could buy and sell his entire existence 10 times over. Damien raised a hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The shouting died down, rippling into silence from the front row to the back. "I have a brief statement," Damien said. His voice did not need to be loud to carry. And then, "Parker has something to say." He turned slightly, angling his body so that the cameras had to capture both of us in the frame. "For 2 years, my family has been living in a nightmare," Damien began. "We trusted systems. We trusted agencies. We trusted the appearance of respectability. We were wrong. The people who claimed to be pillars of the community were rotting from the inside out." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke. "And while the powerful plotted to profit from my son's suffering, one person, a person with no resources, no protection, and every reason to be bitter, chose to act with humanity. Skylar Parker did not bring my son home for a reward. She brought him home because she refused to let him be a victim." A reporter from a national network thrust a microphone forward. "But the Parker family claims this was a conspiracy. Mr. Vance, they say Skylar was part of the plan from the beginning. What do you say to the skeptics who think she is just cashing in?" Damien's jaw tightened. But before he could answer, I stepped forward. I looked directly into the camera lens. I imagined my ex-husband Derek watching from a holding cell. I imagined my mother sitting alone in that big silent house in Fairview. "I didn't do it for money," I said. My voice was steady, clearer than it had ever been in my life. "I didn't do it for fame. I did it because a child is not a line item on a spreadsheet. A child is not leverage. And a child is certainly not a commodity to be traded for quarterly earnings." I took a breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. "There are people in this world who think everything has a price tag," I continued, my eyes finding my father in the crowd. "They think loyalty can be bought and silence can be sold. But they are wrong. Some things are not for sale." The reporter scribbled furiously. This was the soundbite they wanted. The homeless paralegal taking the moral high ground. "Ms. Parker," another reporter called out, "now that you have been exonerated, what will you do? Will you return to Ohio? Will you accept financial restitution from the Vance estate?" Damien stepped in again. "Ms. Parker will not be accepting a reward," Damien announced. A murmur of shock went through the crowd. In their world, nobody turned down a blank check. However, Damien continued, a small genuine smile touching his lips. "Vance Global is launching a new initiative today. We are endowing the North Lake Children's Initiative, a foundation dedicated to recovering and rehabilitating children who have fallen through the cracks of the foster and legal systems. We need someone to lead the coordination of legal advocacy. Someone who understands the system but isn't afraid to break it when necessary." He turned to me. "We have offered the position of Senior Program Director to Skylar Parker. It is a salaried position independent of my personal estate, overseen by a board of ethics. She earned it not because of who she saved, but because of who she is." The flashbulbs erupted again, brighter this time. I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with arrogance. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a handout to the poor relation. This was a job, career, a platform where I could use my law degree and my own broken history to fight for kids like Milo. I wasn't begging for a seat at the table anymore. I had built my own table. I nodded to Damien. "I accept." The crowd cheered. It was a surreal sound, but not everyone was cheering. As the press conference broke up, and Damien moved to answer a question from the police commissioner, a figure lunged toward me from the side. It was my father. He had broken through the line of reporters. His tie was crooked. His eyes were wild. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of my new suit. "What are you doing?" Gordon hissed. His voice was a venomous whisper, shaking with rage. You are destroying us, Skylar. You are standing there preening for the cameras while your brother is being loaded into a paddy wagon. Do you have any idea what you have done? I looked down at his hand on my arm. 2 days ago, that touch would have made me flinch. It would have made me feel small. Now, I just felt a profound, exhausting pity. I pulled my arm away. I didn't yank it. I just removed myself from his grip with a deliberate, calm motion. I didn't destroy anything, Dad, I said. You did. You testified, he spat. You gave them the ledgers. You gave them the emails. You are ruining this family. No, I said. I just stopped covering for it. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He couldn't process it. In his mind, the family was the God we all served, and I was the heretic. He couldn't see that the God was false and the temple was built on the bones of a stolen child. They will take the house, Gordon whispered, his voice cracking. They will take the pension. They will take the club membership. Skylar, I will be a pauper. You will be fine, I said coldly. You are a survivor. Remember, that is what you told me when you kicked me out. You said I would figure it out. Now it is your turn. Before he could respond, a commotion to our left drew our attention. 2 police officers were leading Trent down the walkway. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking at the ground. As he passed us, he looked up. He saw me. He saw the suit. He saw the job offer. He saw the victory. And then he looked at our father. You said you would fix it, Trent said to Gordon. His voice was a broken whine. You said if we got rid of her, we would be safe. Gordon Parker flinched as if he had been struck. He looked at the cameras, praying they hadn't picked up that sentence. But they had. Every microphone within 20 feet had caught the son blaming the father. The police shoved Trent into the back of the waiting cruiser. The door slammed shut. Gordon stood there alone. He looked at the empty space where his son had been. He looked at the empire of lies that was dissolving around his ankles. He realized in that moment that the worthless daughter was the only one left standing and the golden son was gone. He had lost control. He had lost his honor and he was about to lose his freedom. Skylar, the voice came from behind me. I turned around. Milo, Julian, had broken away from the social worker and was running down the steps. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He wasn't looking at the police cars. He was looking only at me. He slammed into my legs, wrapping his arms around my waist. You are staying, he yelled into my coat. I heard him. My dad said you are working for the protectors. That means you are staying. I knelt down on the concrete, ignoring the dirt that might stain the expensive fabric. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight. I am staying, I promised. I am going to be working right across the street. I am going to make sure no other little boys have to sleep in vans or basements ever again. Damien walked over. He didn't try to pull his son away. He didn't try to assert his dominance. He simply placed a hand on Milo's shoulder and looked at me. Thank you, Damien said. And this time, there was no suspicion in his gray eyes. There was only the humble gratitude of a man who had been given a second chance at life. Take care of him, I said, standing up. I will, Damien said. And Skylar, welcome to the team. He took Milo's hand. Come on, Julian. Let's go home for real this time. Milo looked back at me one last time. Wherever you go, I said, repeating the promise I had made in the alleyway. I am still here. He smiled a real smile, one that reached his eyes, and then he turned and walked with his father toward the limousine. I watched them go. I watched the car pull away, surrounded by the security detail that would ensure no one ever touched him again. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust and rain and the crisp, clean scent of Lake Michigan. It smelled like freedom. I turned to leave. I had a meeting with the board of directors in an hour. I had a life to build. But my father was still standing there. He hadn't moved. He was staring at the ground, defeated, ignored by the press who were now chasing the departing limousine. He looked like a ghost haunting his own funeral. I walked past him. I could have kept walking. I could have left him in his silence. But there was one last thing that needed to be said. One last account that needed to be settled. I stopped. I didn't turn my body toward him. I just paused close enough that he could hear me over the wind. "Dad," I said. He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe he thought I would offer him money. Maybe he thought I would offer him mercy. "You told Trent I wasn't worth a penny," I said softly. He flinched. "You said I was done. You said I had no value." I looked him up and down, taking in the expensive suit that could no longer hide the moral bankruptcy underneath. "But I just proved you wrong," I said. "I don't have a price. You can't buy me. You can't sell me. And you certainly can't afford me." I leaned in closer, delivering the final verdict. "I am priceless, Dad, because I am not a product. I am the person who survived you." I didn't wait for an answer. There was no answer. I turned my head forward and began to walk. I walked away from the courthouse. I walked away from the shame. I walked away from the little girl who thought she had to earn her father's love. I walked down the street with my head held high, the click of my heels on the pavement sounding like a drumbeat of victory. Behind me, the man who had called me finished was left standing in the shadows, silent and alone, while I walked into the rest of my life.